Home is where connections are made, memories are formed, and ideas are born. And no one knows home better than NFM. Thanks for tuning in to I Am Home, the podcast that goes deeper than trends and dives into what it means to make your house a home.
Tyler Weiskup here. If you're a longtime listener, you know we're a Berkshire Hathaway company. So today, in honor of the annual meeting, we're dropping a bonus replay of one of our favorite interviews with Ted Weschler. Ted is one of Berkshire Hathaway's investment managers and doesn't do many interviews, but we were lucky enough to have him on to talk all about his career in the investments industry, what it's like to meet Warren Buffett twice, and so much more. If you haven't heard this interview before, you're going to love it. And even if you have, it is such a great re-listen. One last thing, make sure to check out our regular episodes on Wednesdays. Okay, without further fanfare, enjoy this episode with Ted Weschler. Tyler Weiskup here from NFM headquarters with Becca Sudbeck.
Hi, Tyler.
Hey, Becca. And Hillary Waltemath, Visual Display General Manager.
Hey.
Hey, Hillary. And today we're thrilled to bring you a thought leadership episode featuring Ted Weschler of Berkshire Hathaway fame. Very exciting. So we had to bring back our special thought leadership host, Amy Myers, Chief Marketing Officer.
Thanks, Tyler.
Hey, Amy, so exciting. It's going to be an awesome episode. But before we get to that, let me tell you why we're even doing this podcast. And that's because NFM is more than just your everything home store. We're in the business of improving lifestyles because your home life should be your best life. Learn more at nfm.com. And we're on with Ted Weschler. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Tyler. Happy to be here.
Oh, it's going to be so fun. At this point, Amy, I'd love to hand the moderator duties off to you. Would you like to introduce Ted to our audience?
I will, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you coming and giving us your time. So, Ted Weschler's one of Berkshire Hathaway's top 2 investment managers. You got started at W.R. Grace & Company as a junior financial analyst, and then helped start the private equity firm Quad C Management, where you were a partner for 10 years. Then in 1999, he went out on his own, founding Peninsula Capital Advisors, which was a hedge fund you launched in 2000 above a bookstore in a Charlottesville mall. And before that shuttered in 2011, you joined Berkshire Hathaway, and the $2 billion fund has returned 1,236% for investors. Ted and his wife, Sheila, live in Charlottesville with your 2 daughters. How old are your daughters?
20, well, one will turn 21 in just a few weeks, and the other's 23.
Okay, close to mine, so yeah. I know that life, except I have boys. So.
They should meet.
Well, super excited to have you talk to us, but this particular time of year is, going into the Berkshire Hathaway meeting actually being live and not virtual. It's been a couple of years. For us, it's just a super exciting time and high energy, and for the tens of thousands of people that come through. But what's it like? What's it like for you being on the inside of Berkshire Hathaway? And is this exciting?
It's terrific because it's something that I think we all draw energy from, and it. The closer we get, the more energy we get. In the last 2 years, they were fine. We did the remote thing, but there's something about bringing, tens of thousands of people together. And I kind of describe it as a big wedding, because you've got this common link of one way or another you're connected to Berkshire Hathaway. Mm-hmm. And so anybody that you meet during that weekend that's, wearing the credentials, whether it's up here at the Mart or anywhere in town, you got something to talk about. It's just like at a wedding where you know that you're somehow connected to the bride or groom. You're somehow connected to Berkshire. And so it's always fun to meet those people. And then just the energy that builds at the office. I mean, I'm always amazed at the amount of paper and phone calls and emails and all the rest that we've got a very small staff, but it flies out of there in a really, really efficient way. And it's fun. And Warren gets progressively excited as well, because he both adds energy to it and he draws energy from it. And that's something that's just contagious for everybody.
Oh, I like the way you said that. Draws energy from it too. Yes, I think we feel the same way for us. As it's absolutely we have to bring a level of energy, but you definitely come out of it feeling energized and excited. Yeah, I got my credentials this weekend, and I was excited wearing them already.
It's real. Yeah. I was going to wear mine here today.
So I'm going to jump to kind of one of my favorite, and it's a famous story, for you, and the how you had your first lunch meeting with Warren Buffett and your donation to the charity organization that was raising funds to have lunch with Warren Buffett. Because what I was thinking about when I was thinking about that story is you had your own firm. Yeah. You were already running a super successful firm. So when you went into that meeting, it ended up being life-changing. It was life-changing for your career, and life-changing for you. Yeah. Well, and that was my question. I thought, was this like your goal? Were you going into it thinking, man, I'm gonna make this happen? Or did it end up going a whole different direction than you thought? Or
boy, it's kind of an involved thing because first, I went to school in Philadelphia at college, and in 1979 when I started, there was a good friend of mine who we were both in the business school there, and he said, if you're really interested in business, there's this guy Warren Buffett who you just should read anything that he writes. I had never heard of Warren Buffett in 1979, but I respected this guy, and I started reading this stuff, and I was like, wow, there's tremendous clarity to what he says, and it makes sense. And between taking the corporate finance classes and accounting and all that, you had this that was kind of practical applied experience. So here's a guy who really was a hero of mine from, an investing standpoint.
From back when you were in college.
Yeah, from 1979. Yeah. So I'm reading all this stuff. And then I experienced, some decent success in investing, and my fund had a good track record. And I knew that Warren did this auction, and it benefits Glide Foundation in San Francisco, wonderful charity. Sure. And I happened to be a chair of a trust that met twice a year, once in San Francisco and once in Shanghai every year. And it gave me a good reason to kind of travel the world and got to know some folks. But I wanted to understand more about Glide before I did anything that was a big ticket that I was going to write if I was going to do something like this. And so I was out at a trust meeting, and my assistant had reminded me that I wanted to visit the people at Glide and understand the thing. And she set the thing up. I finished my trust work. I spent half a day with the folks at Glide, and it just happened to be the last day of the auction that year. So it was going on while I was there. And I went down to, they invited me down to the closing thing. They didn't know I was registered to bid on it. And I actually ended up winning the thing, and it was like, wow, this is something. And it really, it was after I had spent half a day with the folks at Glide. I mean, just again, great operation there. So that was terrific.
What is the organization?
What's that?
Glide organization.
Glide. They give hope to the otherwise hopeless. I mean, it's a wonderful organization, hundreds of volunteers that run both a soup kitchen and a healthcare clinic in the toughest part of San Francisco, and it's known to everybody in the city, very efficiently run, and touches a lot of lives. And Warren's wife Susie had been very active in the thing, and so that was where the interest came from. Yeah, but I ended up winning this thing, and I wasn't sure, what was going to happen. But I'm back at my office, and I get this phone call on a Tuesday morning, and I pick up my phone, and it's Warren on the other end, and it's like, oh, geez, this is something. This is his hero. Yeah, and it was. He was terrific, and I had said the one thing that I wanted. I had wanted it to be anonymous, and I want my name attached to it, and I also wanted to do it in Omaha instead of New York. It was set up to be a New York lunch at Smith & Wollensky's, a great steakhouse in New York.
But very public.
And he said that's fine. And then he said, when would you like to do it? And I was, well, your schedule will dictate, Mr. Buffett. And he said, he really was unbelievable, because then he says, well, I could do tomorrow night, I could do Wednesday, I could do Thursday, and he rattles on 4 days in a row. And I'm like, and I think I picked the day 2 days later. And so I flew out to Omaha, and I met him in his office, and it clicked. I mean, it really clicked. And it was kind of interesting, because I think there's a bookends to my career. My first job at W.R. Grace, I was an analyst, and then I happened to have a job as the aide to the CEO there. It was a guy by the name of Peter Grace, and Peter and I had a great relationship, but I viewed him more as almost a monarch than a CEO. And he had all the trappings of being the high and mighty CEO of a Fortune 50 company. And he had to go through 6 doors to get to his office, and everything was maximum intimidation and all the rest of that. And then Warren's just like, I show up at headquarters and he bounces out in the hallway and says, great to meet you, Ted. Come on in, grab a seat on the couch, and immediately put me at ease. And it was just great. We visited at the office for maybe 45 minutes, an hour. There were a number of connections. He'd actually met Peter Grace a couple of times, so we had some Peter Grace stories that we connected over. And then we ended up having like a 3-hour dinner at Piccolo's, and it really, really clicked. Then I actually bid on it the following year and won it again for $1 more. And this time I had a little bit more time to think about questions. And
how did you do that's the first time? Because you only have a few days. You didn't expect to win.
Yeah.
How do you plan questions for Warren Buffett?
Really? Yeah. My mind was kind of racing. But again, he's got this wonderful way of putting you at ease, and it was just conversational. And I had a lot of questions about, investing and, lessons learned and, philanthropic dispositions, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of natural topics that came out. I wish I would have had more time to buff and polish, but that's okay. Right. But lo and behold, but another year later, and I've got it again. And then that one I did have a few weeks to think about, and I put together a legal pad of dozens and dozens of things that I wanted to hit on, and we did the same deal. We went to Piccolo's, and it was terrific. But I had probably 3 pages of questions, and toward the end of the dinner, I said, geez, I think I've hit everything just naturally off of my checklist, but I just want to look at my notes. Do you mind? And you can ask me anything if you want, Warren. And he, as I'm looking down at my notes, checking stuff off, he says, I think you'd be a pretty good fit out here. Do you have any interest in working at Berkshire? And I absolutely panicked. This was like this was absolutely not what I was thinking.
Come up the first year.
Oh no, not at all, not at all. And I my immediate reaction was, "There's no way this works." I got this good gig back in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm running a $2 billion fund. It's just me and 2 other people, and but you can't just dismiss it. I mean, this is your hero, and so I was like, wow, that's not what I expected, but thank you. And I got to think about that. So he drives me to the airport right after dinner and drops me off, and he gets out. We both get out, and he says, that thing I mentioned at dinner.
In case you've forgotten.
Yeah. He said, you don't have to decide now, but I mean, if you feel it in like 2, 3, 5 years, just let me know. And I'm like, wow. At the time he had just turned 80, and I'm like, that's really something to have that. And I really was still like, there's no way. This just does not make sense. And I got back to Charlottesville, and I gave a lot of thought to it. And I sent him a note that basically said, it just doesn't work because my kids at the time were in grade school, and my family, had roots in Charlottesville. And I was running a large bankruptcy actually for W.R. Grace. It was one of my investments in Peninsula, and it was a bankruptcy that I worked on for 10 years. And and so I said, I really need to see this through. There's probably another 3 years. And so I sent him a carefully worded letter, sent it off. And within an hour, I've got this response from him. That's email letter on his letterhead that says, thanks for the note. And it was something to the effect of, you can manage money from the moon as far as I'm concerned, so you can stay in Charlottesville. And I like the fact that you want to finish up this bankruptcy. You can do that, on our watch. That's not a problem. It's like, oh. yeah. So it's like, oh. And then I started thinking more and more, and And a day later, he sent me a proposal that kind of laid out how the mechanics would work and all the rest. And then I thought, I'd been doing this fund at Peninsula for 12 years, and once in a while, you just want to scrape the plate clean and do something new. And so I decided, that'll work. And the only thing I asked was that, I wanted to commit that I would come out to Omaha 2 days a week and, be part of the team in Omaha. So I'd commute from Charlottesville, but Charlottesville would still be my home. And it's worked out beautifully. So I've been doing that for, a little over 10 years now.
So you come out 2 days a week?
Yeah. I have 2, 3 sometimes, yeah.
Place here?
Yeah, I've got a condo in Midtown Crossings that's fully outfitted by NFL. Yeah, absolutely. Every piece. Right? It's beautiful. It was perfect.
Did you agonize over what to wear going into this dinner? Was that like an issue?
I did. Yeah. No, and that's one of those. It's funny. I absolutely did, and then I decided that I should go in. I remember that well. I decided I should go in with a suit coat and open shirt, and of course he's wearing a tie. And that was that. Oh, I fumbled it right out of the block, but it's okay.
Obviously worked out.
Yeah.
Was it dessert at Dairy Queen afterwards, or was that not?
We had the root beer floats.
Okay.
Yeah, which was terrific.
Yeah, both times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, both times.
So how fast was that in between, like the second meeting? Because it sounds like it moved pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it was no more than 3 weeks after that second dinner that I said yeah, and then I had to send a letter to all my investors that I was going to shut down shop and send them their capital back, and they came together very quickly. Yeah.
Interesting. So can we jump back a little then?
Oh yeah, okay, we can go anywhere you want.
We're gonna kind of flip back to your first job. So you're coming right out of school, and you were a junior financial analyst.
That's indeed what my title was.
But what kind of caught my eye on that is that, I mean, you're starting entry level into the company, and then like within 7 years, you're leaving with the vice chair to start a company. And, when you talk to people about...
That's good research. That's
you talk about career path. I mean, to have that sort of visibility and trajectory to your career and that quickly, I'm just kind of fascinated by what do you look back and say, how did you prove yourself that quickly? How did you... what would you recommend to people?
Yeah, lucky. I mean, it was just, life's so funny in that stuff because I joke about the junior financial analyst, but that was a big deal because I was hired in as a test case into this department that did mergers and acquisitions at W.R. Grace. And I was the first undergraduate that they hired. It was otherwise just MBAs, and they were all called financial analysts. And so I had the business card that said junior financial analyst.
And not the graduate degree yet.
And so it was, and that's fine. But, it was a good gig that, I didn't make much money, but if you stayed until 8 o'clock working, you got free taxi home and free dinner, and that made a big difference. So I was there till at least 8 every night, and it was fun. I liked working a lot more than studying, and I through really happenstance, I worked there for 2 years. Had never even seen Peter Grace, the CEO of the company. And I got a phone call 2 years into it, and I had been working on a transaction, a leverage buyout of a medical company. And I had been working on it for probably 2 months. And I get this phone call, and it's one of Mr. Grace's assistants saying that Mr. Grace wants to be briefed on the National Medical Care acquisition, and your boss is not in the building. Your boss isn't in the building. And your boss isn't in the building.
You're the one left.
And I'm like, oh no, what does that mean? And he said, we'd like you to come up to the 48th floor, to the top floor, and brief Mr. Grace on this project. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. I mean, I'm 23. I look like I'm 12. This is not what I signed up for. And I go up there. I had no choice. And they, again, I get ushered through door after door after door, and then into this conference room that's this enormous horseshoe that could sit probably 55, 60 people. And there's a dozen other people there, and I get, ushered into the center of the horseshoe.
All
and
like senior leaders.
Senior leaders, all the top people at the company. And then, once we're all seated, this door opens and, His Holiness comes through. and Peter comes through. And he always smoked a pipe. And he looks down and he looks at me and he says, "Who are you?" And I'm Ted Weschler. I'm here to brief you on national medical care. And you could see him getting a little bit agitated. He had never met me. He didn't know anything about this. And he said, "So where'd you go to school?" I said, "I went to University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton undergraduate." He said, "You don't have an MBA?" And he says in a really biting way. And I'm like, "Oh, this is not started out well."
And the junior, though.
Yeah, exactly. Oh. And his pipe starts to shake a little bit, and he really was getting quite worked up, and he starts going off about, "It's the biggest acquisition we've ever done. My grandfather founded this company. You're sending this kid up to brief me on this thing." And then he starts going down the line. "Chuck, where did you go to graduate school?" "Yale, Peter." And then it's like I'm going to join the Peace Corps. This is just horrible, absolutely horrible. And then actually it was this guy Chuck, who was the vice chairman. He said, "Peter, just let the young man at least answer some of your questions." And Peter listened to him, Mr. Grace, and he starts asking me questions. And I've been doing 100-hour weeks on this deal, and I knew the deal well. And it ended up being like an hour and a half meeting, and it was painful to start, but once it got rolling, I felt like I did okay. I felt like I did okay. And then at the end of it, Mr. Grace looks over and he says, "There's two people in this room that don't have an MBA, you and me." And it's like,
wow.
I still felt like hell, but that's okay. That's awesome. And then literally the next day, I got a phone call saying that Peter always had 3 assistants that traveled the world with him, either as advanced people or financial types, to do analysis while we were traveling. And she said he let one of his assistants go this morning, and he'd like you to join him in Boston tonight and pack for 3 weeks. So it's like, let me talk to my boss. And I said, "No, you don't have to talk to your boss. Just be in Boston." And so, the next 2 years, I was a traveling aide to Mr. Grace, which was really fascinating. Wow. And it was just and he was one of these guys, you really couldn't say much when you were in the room with him in business meetings, but you were the proverbial fly on the wall. He let you sit in on anything. Mm-hmm. And
so you could learn by listening.
Really, really powerful, yeah, mm-hmm. and just very interesting. And his management style was a little bit different, but it was interesting and a ton of fun. And and I did I guess I did a decent job on that. And then in 1987 came along, and there was this crash in October, mm-hmm. And I actually had at that point, just before the crash, I had accepted a job with an arbitrage shop that did investment in takeovers. And Mr. Grace was very upset that I was leaving, but he, whatever, he accepted it until the crash happened. And then he called me and he said, you're basically an idiot. He used much rougher language than that for leaving. And there's got to be some way that you'd like to stick around here. So he starts sending in these senior folks with different ideas for me and what have you. And I ended up becoming the aide to the next heir apparent to Peter. And Peter was at that time maybe 75, and this was probably heir apparent number 4 or 5. There had been several people who looked like they might take mm-hmm. over for him, and so I did that because it was a guy that I had a great relationship with, and I worked with, and we'd done some leverage buyouts, and that was another great experience. But that's the gentleman that I started the private equity firm with.
That was Daniels,
and he and I set up a
Daniels.
completely new company. And I was going to leave Grace and start a money management firm. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, and over a dinner we hatched this idea of setting up our own private equity firm. And he was a gray-haired guy with gravitas, and I was the maniac in the back room who knew the tax code and knew how to use a computer, and it worked. And that firm's still very successful in Charlottesville. It's got 30 professionals, manages several $1 billion, and that was a good thing. But then I wanted to set up truly my own shop, and that's what took me to setting up my hedge fund.
So there was the bit of luck with getting the exposure, but then your preparation and.
Yeah,
I'd be curious your reputation in the company, because I think that would be interesting watching someone take that move.
It was an odd time, and I wasn't, big corporations tend to be very political, and I wasn't political because I didn't know anything about corporate life. I didn't know that it wasn't right to CC this person or CC that person, and I think I got a lot of buys because of that. People, didn't view me as some kind of clever villain.
You weren't maneuvering.
I was just, I was just like, I'm here to do a job. I want to, make this company better if I can. And it worked out.
Yeah.
That's a good story.
I love that.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to kind of skip, you sort of started talking about this, but you were at Quad C. It still exists to this day.
Yeah.
You were there 10 years,
Yep.
built it. What was the impetus for doing your own thing? Was that was that always the ultimate goal?
No,
or?
it's interesting because when we first set up Quad C, it was this amalgamation of my partner's idea that we wanted to have control investments where we actually bought companies, and my preference was I wanted to do investing in publicly traded securities. And
Are those two typically different worlds?
Yeah,
Okay.
and one is buying things listed on the stock exchange, and just where in effect you own a small percentage of the business, whereas the other stuff that he was good at was actually owning the businesses and making the operational decisions. And so we created this hybrid where we said, okay, we're going to set up a vehicle where we'll ask folks that we know that have some money to put money in, and I would invest it in public securities while we were looking for control investments. So, and I kind of wore both hats. And when you're studying, if somebody shows you a business that's in, furniture manufacturing, first thing you're going to do is look at everybody in furniture manufacturing and how they're valued in the marketplace. And once in a while, you'll see something and say, boy, this just doesn't make sense. This is really cheap. There might be an opportunity to invest a little bit in this publicly traded company, and maybe we'll do the acquisition as well or not. And that was fun. I liked that, and we did that.
You liked the find,
yeah, and it was because I could look at it from both angles, and it there's a pretty high bar for doing something in the public securities. It wasn't like I was a trader. It was like, is there something really compelling? And there's a great quote of Warren's about, we'd all be better investors if we had a punch card that every time we made an investment, we had to click it, and that punch card had only 20 punches available to you. So you really had to have this high bar to make an investment. Well, lo and behold, in the 6 years that we did this, I made exactly 20. Exactly. It's just really weird how that worked out. But in 19 of the 20 worked out really well, and I had a nice track record because of that. But we had reached this, at the 6-year mark at Quad C, we reached this point where we wanted to raise money not just from individuals but from institutions, so like the Harvard Endowment and Brown University and what have you, and they're wonderful investors, but they tend to have checklists that they want to see, and they want you to be exactly this slot or that slot. They don't want you to be a hybrid that does both control investments and little things off to the side. And and I worked on setting up the private placement memorandum and working with the investment bank on how to put this thing together. And I concluded that boy, I've got this nice track record, but, it's not going to fit in this institutional model. So I said, okay, fine, we'll just take that out and we'll raise this institutional fund, which we did. And it was a successful raise. We got a ton of money. But then I realized it wasn't exactly what I loved. And the firm had grown a bit. I was doing more people management than investing in businesses. And I mean, the thing that I'm an analyst. I mean, I still want to have a business card. I want it to say analyst, not junior financial, but analyst. and it's, and I was getting away from that. And how many employment agreements can you negotiate? I mean, that's what it came down to. It's like the learning curve had just flattened out. And I saw a window of opportunity that if I could take the private equity mindset where you're buying the business and you expect to own it for 5 to 10 years and do that with publicly traded securities where I'd buy, 3 or 4% of a business, but I'd have a very long-term view. I thought that might be something that would work and would be appealing to some investors.
Is that a little bit different in the model because the turnover is typically quicker?
Yeah. The average holding period for a share of stock on the New York Stock Exchange is less than a year.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just
so there's a market.
Far more people that are trading than are actually buying a piece of the business and holding it for the long term. And I wanted to do it in a way that I wasn't in any way, hostile or, negative toward management. But if you're in something with a 5 to 10 year view, you've got a better chance to build a relationship with the management team and have credibility. And so there were several of these things. They were small companies, but they didn't necessarily have a great connection to Wall Street or to capital markets. And not that I necessarily did, but I at least knew, the way around. And I would never go in and say, I know this stuff better than you. I'd just say, here's some ideas and, it may be helpful to you. And over time, I call it a MAD investing, M-A-D, make a difference investing. Mm-hmm. If you can potentially change the outcome by being actively involved in some part of the process. And that's where this W.R. Grace bankruptcy came along, where it's like, wow, I know this company well. It was in bankruptcy because it had over 100,000 lawsuits against it relating to asbestos exposure of some of their products. And I done a lot of work in bankruptcy for whatever reason, and I thought it was something that I might be able to make a difference there by getting involved. And I bought about 15% of the business, and again, it took 13 years, but it ended up being a very successful restructuring that I was involved in. But the short answer to your question is I wanted to get back into just investing in public securities, because that's something in private equity where you're looking at control investments. You're relying on investment bankers coming to you and giving you a book, and that book's 120 pages of all this wonderful stuff about these businesses. But you open it up on the first page, it says book number 132 or something, and so it's like they're signing everything, and then you end up feeling bad if you don't at least bid on it, because guess what? They stop sending you books, and you got to keep the books coming in if you're going to do it. No. But on public securities, if you don't buy something, guess what? The Wall Street Journal still shows up at your doorstep every day, or your computer, as the case may be. You don't have that, in effect, moral obligation to move on anything. You can just wait for the right opportunity to come along. That was always appealing to me.
All right, I have to ask you this.
Yeah.
You got 19 out of 20. What was the one you missed? I'm too curious.
It was.
I know you know it.
I do. It's funny because it went by the name of TW Holdings at the time, and my initials are TW. So it's like just of course I should have stayed away from there. And it was a big restaurant operator at the time. It owned Denny's and several other things. It was, and I, sometimes things don't work out, but it did not work out.
But you had to be something you thought in your original assumption.
Yeah. No, it was.
Just the initials.
Yeah. Vanity took me.
So one thing, I saw a interview of Warren Buffett, and he said that you are one of the few people he's met that reads as much as he does.
Oh, I didn't see that.
And I read something else where you said that your job really is reading.
Yeah.
And would just love to hear kind of what you read and how that kind of informs, because a lot of times you think people are all reading the same thing, right? You're reading the trade journals, and is your success more about that you're able to interpret it, or that you're reading more, so you're pulling more information? But just
no, you hit on it, and it's a great question. The way you ask it is just right, because I think one of the great mistakes of investing is that people do end up reading the same thing, and you're the only way you're going to have success in the stock market is if you've got what's referred to as a variant perception, something that's different from the masses. Because if everybody says, "Wow, this Facebook is hot," well, everybody jumps in. Do you really have? And that I'm speaking 10 years ago, not right now. One of the things that Warren and I have this in common. We both love newspapers, and I really enjoy newspapers, and I grew up with them in the house. And there's kind of always the morning, almost a competition with my mother, because she always read it before I did, and it was like, who picked up more from the newspaper? It's like, all in good fun, but it's one of those habits that you get into. And what's really great about newspapers, though, is there's a randomness about them. Just by definition, there's different sections to it, and I read a bunch of different ones, but it's a random set of stories that come together because an editor says, "Geez, this might be interesting," or what have you, or it is top of mind. It's very interesting to see how a given political story is portrayed in USA Today versus the New York Times. What will be front page above the fold in the New York Times, maybe on page 3 of USA Today. Much deeper reporting in the New York Times, but you really want to understand where it's positioned. And then, how's the Financial Times in London going to play the thing, because you do need to keep all the different perspectives, take them into account. But it is random. And, if I can come up with one decent investment idea a year, boy, that is great. And it is a game of, I call it a game of connect the dots, where you want to build up a terrific data set, and maybe you'll be able to say, "Ooh, I read this here, I read this here, I read this here," and make a connection such that you've got a little bit different perception of where a business is going to be 5 years from now than where the market does. And a game I always like to play is do a work on a company and say, without knowing where it's what the price is in the stock market, study and say, this is where I think it'll be. And then you do the uncover and you say, I think this should trade at $82 a share. And it's like, ooh, it's at 40. Ooh, this is interesting. Yeah. Usually means I missed something really bad. but it's always been a game that I've played, and it keeps it interesting. But then trade journals, they're really powerful. And there's a lot of investors that don't subscribe to those. And actually, Furniture Today, I've been a Furniture Today subscriber for the last, over 30 years now. And it's interesting because it is one of those things that, it's a 10-minute read once a week. But if you read it with regularity, you do see, the different names and how they're evolving and, who's doing what. And that's, where I got to know a Nebraska Furniture Mart was, I actually didn't even make that connection with Berkshire, but I used to always read about that. And I've been involved with furniture in a bunch of different ways over the years. But I always do want to be able to look myself in the mirror and say that I'm reading enough weird stuff that nobody else is reading the same stuff that I am. And if you're just reading the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, there's no way you're going to beat other people. You're just reading the same thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's other just peripheral stuff that
and so I read Furniture Today and Uranium Weekly. I'm not sure there's a lot of people that subscribe to both of those. Yeah. You're looking at one of them.
Well, and the investments you do at Berkshire are different than what you were doing, or maybe I should ask that.
Well, yes and no. They're different in that it's just a much bigger pool of capital, and that's not insignificant factor because we do have a very large pool of capital. And when I was running Peninsula, at its largest, it was $2 billion. And I typically would have that invested in 10 different ideas, which would be about $200 million per idea. And there's, thousands of companies out there that would let you deploy $200 million in them that are big enough to do that. But when you get up into the Berkshire size, I essentially need ideas that I can deploy at least $1 billion into.
Which narrows
it because I generally, except in exceptional cases, I generally don't want to own more than 10% of a business, because once you go over 10%, you have additional filing requirements with the SEC. In effect, every trade you do, you need to publicly declare within 72 hours of making the trade. And that's it's a hassle. And so, you work into the math, and if you got to put $1 billion to work and you don't want to be more than 10%, it means you got to only invest in companies that have at least a $10 billion market capitalization. So that cuts out a big chunk of the market. But my primary job is looking for ideas like that, public securities. But I also work on acquisitions. So if deals come along that might be interesting to buy 100% of, similar to what I did in my Quad C days or at W.R. Grace, it's something I'm very comfortable with. I've been doing those kind of analysis for a lot of years, and again, I'm just here to help out wherever I can. Yeah.
Any books you have read recently that you'd say recommend highly?
Wow. Yeah, let's think about that. I must say, the vast majority of stuff I read are the periodicals. Yeah, I'm in the middle one that is quite good. It's called $1 Trillion Triage. That is the
Not heard of that one.
detailing the in effect the bailout of the system from COVID in March of 2020, and it's a gripping read because it really goes through how quickly COVID became a global issue and the ramifications for the global economy and the U.S. economy, and how interdependent the U.S. economy is with the rest of the world, and what very brave people like Jay Powell had to do on a moment's notice to make sure the wheels didn't fly off the train. And it's quite the read. Quite the read.
How did COVID affect your day-to-day Berkshire Hathaway's, from investment and strategy?
Yeah. Well, there's the kind of the humanistic side where all of a sudden everybody's like at home. And I think Warren and I had in common, we were like, this was not going to work. It's like I like sitting at my desk. It's space that I'm comfortable with, whether it's Charlottesville or Omaha. I think Warren worked out of his house for maybe a week or two, and it's like, this ain't going to work. And so we there's only 26 people at headquarters, and most of the folks went remote. We went very careful with the masking. And I started I did come out pretty much every week though. And I took a test every time I came out. I didn't want to be the one who's bringing a nasty bug from Virginia to Omaha. So that was a big impact.
Yeah.
But then, it was a tough one from an investing standpoint because, all of us, I mean, it's Warren, Todd Combs is the other investment manager. We looked at each other and it's like, wow, just have not seen anything like this. Not sure how this is going to play out. And we had a lot of very good information, but we didn't have a relative edge.
Did you have those conversations just like what you just said there? Like, how is this going to even play out?
No, it was, sitting there over, quarter pounders with cheese saying like, what do we think? And then it was like, geez, it just don't know. And it was brilliant work on the part of the Fed and Jay Powell in, fixing everything. But the moment they came in, I think it was March 20th of 2020, that the Fed effectively put a floor under everything. And the moment they did that, the opportunities that would have been there for Berkshire they weren't there anymore. I mean,
What does that mean?
Well, it means that, historically the best times for Berkshire have been when there's been difficulties out there, where people needed capital and banks weren't lending because there was a banking crisis going on. And so we'd say, wow, we like your business. We'll effectively lend you money, or we'll buy 15% of your business in a negotiated transaction. Good for you, good for us. In 2000, we did several of those. Warren did several of those kind of trades that were very, very good. They built on Berkshire's reputation. They helped the companies involved. We've done one with General Electric, one with Harley Davidson motorcycles, one with Tiffany's. I mean, they're just a bunch of these, but they all were very good transactions. Relatively low risk. And we thought, like, maybe we can do this time around. But the window closed very quickly, and with all of a sudden, the view was, the banking system was going to effectively shut down, and there wasn't going to be lending available for institutions. But in actual fact, there was plenty of money available. The Fed came in and said, open the vault, whatever you need. And even
Which
Berkshire
closes
can't
the
compete
door.
with that.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And then, so how has that kind of transitioned versus where we are now?
Yeah, well, then you get to kind of watch the cards play out, and it really was quite interesting because one of the indirect beneficiaries was NFM. That the nesting phenomenon, that all of a sudden people are spending a lot more time at their house, and they're like, wow,
Didn't like their sofa.
Yeah, it's like
not all day.
time for a new one. Time for a new one, and it's played out very differently in the different businesses, but on balance, it's actually played out very, very well, and we've got just a great mix of operating businesses that make up Berkshire, and it was rocky for that March, April, but all of a sudden then it was like, wow, this could work out, and people got into the cadence of a different way of doing business, but it really has been all good, and we found some ideas in the public marketplace. This last go round, the tragedy at Russia, Ukraine, that really did rattle the markets, and that's the sort of thing that I think we're in a better position to assess, because there has been similar things that have happened in the last 125 years that you can say, how does this play out, and what are the probability adjusted, what sort of outcomes could you have? And we've made some public announcements in the last 30 days of things that we're investing in. So we've moved some money in the last couple months.
What are you thinking a lot about right now?
Oh, wow.
Besides uranium today.
Yeah.
Note to
I feel
self.
bad, actually. I let that lapse now. I'm feeling bad. So I gotta resubscribe.
Re-up your subscription.
The things I think a lot about, but I don't have any influence over, is inflation. It's real. How long is it going to last? How does it impact different businesses? The strength of the U.S. dollar or the weakness on any given month. China-U.S. relations. These are all big picture things that are going to impact the long term, and they shape our thinking. But they're all background things. But again, it's what's interesting about this business is you kind of have to have a little bit of background knowledge on all this stuff to have the right lens to look at investment opportunities.
You're feeling positive.
Oh yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm feeling positive. I always feel positive. I mean, it's a system that works, and there's always going to be some negativity out there, but again, the world of investing, as long as you take a long-term view, we've got the right incentives, particularly in the United States, of entrepreneurs are encouraged, new technologies develop, new things and new and positive things happen every day, every week, every year. And so, yeah, I can't help but be optimistic.
Thinking about your point earlier about reading and consuming all of this information, I imagine that's the best way to kind of stay informed on all of that.
Yeah, it's because it's not just one specific thing. It is this, all these different flows of information.
Yeah.
And it's also where it's important to read, a paper from Europe and a paper from Canada and, a bunch of stuff in between, because it does give you a little bit different perspective.
Yeah, certainly. And rather than being overwhelmed by all of the information, just view it as another opinion or perspective on it. So
And variant perception.
There you go.
like
I'll
that.
use that
all
term.
coming together.
Well, we always like to come back and talk about home.
Yeah.
To kind of recenter on what we do. So a couple of questions for you about just home. You've moved a few times and you've got your place here in Charlottesville. What makes the house feel like home to you? What are there key pieces or things you have to have?
Oh, it's interesting. The growing up, my father was with A&P food stores, and we moved pretty much every 3 or 4 years from when I was 0, 4, 8, 12.
So your parents had to rebuild homes.
And there's those pieces that always moved house to house that define the house, and I have I don't know, do they still sell Naugahyde? The name Naugahyde, does that ring a bell?
I don't think so.
It's for me though. Why?
The name sounds familiar, but
It was one of the first faux
You guys are
leathers.
too young.
Okay.
And it was very, very popular.
Okay. I
Very
was like, I've
popular
heard
in the
that before.
40s, 50s, and 60s.
That would've been okay.
And-
It was like a branded faux leather.
Yeah, it was.
Now it's just like
and it was called
polyurethane.
It was
Yeah.
called Naugahyde. And actually, in the '60s, they had a very successful. I thought it was funny as a kid. It was a advertising campaign about how Naugahyde came from the Naga, which is this mythical animal, and they said that the nice thing about the Naga is it shed its skin, and they didn't have to. I think
we need to file that away.
That is the marketing campaign.
Yeah.
But it was basically it's vinyl on top of fabric, and it cleaned up nice and was great in the house of kids. But I've got I call it my father's Naugahyde Archie Bunker chair, and it's another.
You still have it?
Oh, absolutely. And it's still the same Naugahyde, and it's beautiful. I mean, this stuff will last forever. And but I'm sure if an interior designer came in, they'd say, you got to get rid of that chair. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to get rid of that chair. That's my dad's chair. And but then there's just we always did get something new growing up. Each house that we went to. I think one of the things and this is kind of interesting because I'm always kind of a student of inflation and products and what have you. And furniture has gotten relatively much less expensive over the last 50 years. And, the example I use is, the couch that my mom and dad bought in 1965 when I was 4 years old, they would have spent like 4 weeks of the, average earnings of and now that 4 weeks now is closer to 1 week. And it's a combination of, much more efficient manufacturing and much more efficient distribution of something like NFM, which is really, incredible because, when we bought something, it was going to the neighborhood furniture store and it was nice. It was relationship driven, but boy, it was very, very expensive. And the idea that, and I think I've looked at these numbers recently, inflation for furniture since 1965, when I was 4 years old, about 2% a year for the last, 55 years. And overall inflation is about 4%. And that over a long period of time, that's got huge implications. And it really is quite something that, now you can get fresher stuff and funner stuff. And if you get tired of that sofa or what have you, I'm not going to get tired of the Naugahyde. Maybe that'll come back big. But we always did make a point of getting something new. And I still have a lot of fun items from my house growing up, and I love my apartment here because it was a chance to just start with a blank slate and got a bunch of stuff. And if I was doing it again, there's probably some things that I wouldn't have bought. It's funny, I bought I outfitted this probably 6 years ago, and I bought 2 nice TVs that I don't think I've turned on in the last year. So, what I want to watch, I watch on my iPad now. And, but that's also what's fun about the world is it changes so quickly. Yeah.
So which daughter's vying for the chair?
The Naga head.
They're like, I'm not taking that chair.
I don't think there's going to be any fighting. I think that they might have to buy an extra large like funeral vault just to like put that with me.
That's amazing.
Well, we're getting down to the end of time, so a couple of final questions. You're a runner.
Yes, I am.
That's marathon runner. You missed not very many days. Did you run today?
I did. Wow. One day in the last 38 years.
What is it about running and any lessons that go into your investing from that?
It's a good question. My mindset is very different when I'm running, and I think there's some clinical stuff on this. I mean, if you have increased blood flow, your brain works a little bit differently, and to the extent I hit something that's a difficult conceptual issue, and I'm reading or analyzing something, I mentally like to put it off to the side and say, I want to think about this again when I'm running, and it's a great clear your head. And then there's time to just run and I don't think about anything. But the discipline aspect of doing it every day, it's a great way to wake up and kind of.
You're a morning runner.
I used to be a night runner, and now it's absolutely the first thing I do, and it helps me wake up. But it's something that I really, I just feel I've never felt bad. I've never felt worse after a run. So I can have the flu, feel awful, and like, how am I going to get out running? But I always feel better. I may still feel bad, but I always feel better after going for a run. Yeah.
Love that. And then final, what excites you about the future? Investment, personal?
Yeah. It just, the investing business is I just find it so interesting. If you're intellectually curious, and that's something kind of really a common element among Warren and myself and Todd is, there's nothing better, because if you get, if you're studying the banking industry in the morning and you say, geez, okay, I've had enough of this. Well, then you can study the home furnishings business, and then go back to uranium in the evening. It's just it's just fun, and the fact that things are changing, and change is a constant. It's always going to be new things out there, and so the idea that I didn't even know what streaming was 10 years ago, and now that's just kind of dominating the
now
delivery.
You don't watch your TV.
And that's the sort of thing that it just keeps it interesting, and then you overlay healthcare and these vaccines that would come up with, and the science that got done over the last 24 months, just incredible. I mean, really exciting stuff, and to be fortunate enough to be on the earth while all these things are accelerating and all these new developments. There's some issues, and this again, the conflicts are terrible, but there's it's on balance more than swamped by the good stuff that's going on out there.
Well, I learned a ton.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to. Let's go for a couple more hours.
We have more questions.
We didn't get to the yes/no section of the.
You have to come back and share more of these stories. It'd be a blast.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone who's listening at home and encourage you to go to nfm.com to learn more about our company and shop 24/7 for today's top furnishing styles. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Till then, remember, home is what you make it.
Thanks for joining us today for I Am Home with Tyler Weisskopf, Hillary Waltemath, and Becca Sudbeck. No one knows home quite like NFM. So if you'd like more information on home design at NFM, please check out nfm.com and leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice.